Tommy Roberts, and welcome back to the Mayor's Table. And I have with me again this morning City Manager Rob Mays. Welcome, Rob.
Welcome, thank you.
Rob, we are closing the books, or we have closed the books on our fiscal year 16 budget, and we have actual numbers now, and we can go back and we can evaluate how we performed during fiscal year 16. We also have some numbers in on the first month of fiscal year 17, July of 2017. But I know that before we go into too much detail about where we are now, I want to talk a little bit about where we've been over the last 8 to 9 years that lead us to the situation we're in now.
Yeah, you know, this Mayor's Table that you've instituted has been a great tool for communicating with the public, and we've gotten to talk about a lot of fun subjects and a lot of new things happening in the city, but it's important we also talk about the challenges as well, and finances certainly is one, and that's going to come at no surprise to our community with the kind of layoffs and things we've seen over the last year. A lot of people are hurting, and there's been a lot of news in the press about the problems the state has and some of our other local communities, and Farmington's no different. But if you kind of go back historically, you and I together as mayor and city manager have not ever known anything but really austerity. Since 2009, that was the high point of the city's finances. We still today, it's hard for people to fathom this, but our tax revenue remains about 11% below what it was in 2009. So you just kind of put in perspective, we've not recovered from the pre-recession levels. In the meantime, we've seen inflation of about 12%. So in a very real way, the city of Farmington, in terms of tax dollars, operates with 23% less spending power if you compare the actual dollars we get with the actual spending power of how far those dollars will go. So we've managed that the last 8 fiscal years by eliminating waste, finding efficiencies. We've reduced our workforce. We've implemented technology, but frankly, we've delayed and deferred a lot of things that need to be done to manage that reality. We started to see things improve back in 2015, and then things, have fallen again. And so, kind of remarkably, as we sit here today, our tax base in the last 12 months has dropped 23% on an apples-to-apples comparison of where we were as we closed out 2015 to where we closed out 2016.
There have been a lot of reasons for that, but principal among them are the decline in the extractive industries here in San Juan County in northwest New Mexico. A lot of that is related to national issues. We have low commodity prices. The price of oil is relatively low and has been for some time. The price of natural gas has also been low for quite some time. We've had increasing regulatory burden on the oil and natural gas industry as well as on the coal industry. The result has been the loss of many jobs in our community that have buying power north of probably $100 million per year.
Right.
And so that's a significant shrinkage of our tax base locally. The county is experiencing similar kinds of problems. The cities of Aztec and Bloomfield also experiencing those problems, and maybe even more severe in those smaller communities, in as much as the retail base in San Juan County is the city of Farmington. But we have challenges, and they're coming from the federal government. We are challenged by some actions that our state government has taken.
Sure,
so speak to that, if you would.
Well, the biggest that we've been talking about for several years, of course, is hold harmless. Hold harmless is where the state made a decision to phase out over 15 years what will be the equivalent of another 11% of our GRT, about $5.8 million. They're shifting from our coffers to theirs through action they've already taken. And we sat right here and discussed back at the Mayor's Table during the last legislative session. They had legislation introduced to come back after the city for more. We've already been told that at the next legislative session in this coming January that there'll be real proposals introduced again to come back out the cities and counties for even more, again to balance the challenges that the state have on the backs of local governments. And what we try to remind people, whatever economic impacts the state is feeling at the state level, we're feeling it at the local level as well. It's the same tax base.
Let's bring this discussion forward in time now and make it a bit more current. let's talk a little bit about our fiscal year 2016 experience, which just closed June 30th of this year. How did we do? How did we fare?
Well, I really want to emphasize that we have planned and prepared all along. We weren't taken off guard by any of these things. We last year cut our budget a lot. We finished last year with a surplus, meaning that our actual expenses were under actual revenue. So we've continued to live within our means, and I want our citizens to know that. But this dramatic fall off of the last quarter of last year and starting this year has been dramatic. You'll recall during the budget process, we already went in with a very conservative budget in the planning, but at the time the council indicated and had a comfort level that we had a pre-planned 10% contingency plan to cut even more if it would need be. And that's kind of where we find ourselves now. We're 1 month into the new fiscal year, and the GRT trend is pretty tough compared to a year ago, 23%. Our first month, July of 2016, which is the first month of FY17, our tax revenue was about 10% under a budget, and we already had cut the budget by 10%. So we've based on that, the last couple months of 2016 and the first month of 17, we have determined to implement the first phase of our contingency planning. It's not emergency planning. It's early intervention planning. So we have cut 5% from our budget, and that's been done, and that's impacted all of our departments.
I think this is very important, and I want to be sure our viewers understand exactly what has transpired here as we've developed our 2017 budget. So as we were in that process, the council adopted a budget for fiscal year 2017 that was based upon a projection of a 10% decline in revenue as compared to our 2016 budget.
Correct.
And alongside of that budgeting process, we also discussed a contingency plan for a further 10% reduction depending upon our experience with gross receipts tax revenue to the city in the early months of 2017. So we've just begun fiscal year 2017, and we have 1 month of experience in the books now, and that's July. So that gets us to the point where you've talked about implementing the contingency plan, and you have administratively imposed a 5% reduction. So talk about some of the specifics of that 5% reduction.
Well, you start with what's been, you try to say is the low-hanging fruit, but I cannot emphasize so much that there's not a lot of fat in this budget. So we've cut about $3 million more from our expenditure budget administratively, and that's across the board to different departments depending on, you start by, we haven't laid off any personnel yet, but we've frozen hiring, so we have about 15 vacancies that we're holding. We're delaying all capital projects. We're not buying any fleet vehicles, and then each department was given a assignment of how much money they needed to cut from their budget. So we've tried at this level to cut things that will not have an immediate impact on our citizens. It's things like I just mentioned. You know, we can not buy any police cars this year, but that's not sustainable. We've cut training, we've cut emergency contingency money. But these are not. I want to be sure we understand these are going to be impactful. You take the police department. We've cut $700,000 from the police department's budget. That will have an impact. But at this point, we're not taking any police officers off the street. So it's across the board. On every department's been cut, and they're going to continue to do their best to provide services.
And we have another phase of the contingency plan, what you have called phases 3 and 4. Now, phases 1 and 2 you've administratively implemented. We think that the citizens won't see much of a decline in services. It'd be difficult to detect any decline in the quality of service based on those reductions. But the next 5% is a different story.
It is.
And so I think it's important to convey to our viewers what the impact of an additional 5% would be.
You start looking at additional cuts now. Again, the citizens won't see an immediate impact of us, say, not buying any police cars this year, but there is an impact. we start getting beyond this, the council's got to get involved and make priority decisions, because that's where you're looking at either whether we can dip into cash reserves any further, or whether we're going to literally start closing down facilities or cutting back on the number of police officers on the street, or all the things that that people want and enjoy, from our public safety to our quality of life. Everything we do is critical to somebody. So the next level of cuts, if they would become necessary, really requires some very difficult decisions that our city council will have to make on behalf of the citizens, and certainly would entail input from the citizens. I'm sure we've had discussions like this in the past. We've talked to the citizens about the kinds of things that are kind of a menu of options to cut, and ultimately the council will have to make those decisions.
That additional 5% equates to about another $3 million. And as you and I have talked about this problem, that I would be a proponent for tapping into our cash reserve to some extent to help to mitigate that reduction in revenue flow. I think if we could probably dip into our cash reserve by another 4% and come up with about $2 million to $2.4 million. And in doing that, we could defer the more significant cuts to services that we may be looking at. What's going to be the trigger point for making these hard decisions? Because we only have 1 month of experience in for the new fiscal year. If we had another similar month, in your mind, does that trigger some of these decisions, or do we have the luxury of waiting for 2 or 3 more months?
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer. We've been through 9 years of austerity together, and we've operated the council and my management team with a philosophy that we don't want to overact or underact. Certainly raising taxes is a last resort, and certainly massively cutting services is a last resort. So that's what cash is for. You say, what is a rainy day? We've done a good job in the last 8 or 9 years of building good, solid cash reserves that exceed the state minimums. So it creates an opportunity to buy us some time to not overreact to our situation. I think we have implemented levels 1 and 2 very early, because that's the key to them being effective, is that if they're not going to have dramatic impacts, you need a lot of time to see the savings. I think we probably would take another 1 or 2 GRT, depending on where they're at, and if the trend hasn't stabilized, or if we haven't found that bottom, then we have to start talking about what our options are. And a lot of it really is light of next year's budget. You can think in terms of cash as a bridge to cover where we're at this year, as you even begin to plan for what things will be like. Are we going to have to, you can't live on cash forever, so we either have to cut expenses or raise revenue. Those are the only, or some combination of those two. But cash buys us the opportunity to be able to be very focused and intentional about it and not overreact too quickly, because we have a little bit of padding in there.
Rob, this is a topic that we'll continue to monitor, and there may be more opportunities for us to come back on another segment of the Mayor's Table to continue to update our viewers and citizens. I think before closing, though, I want to make an observation about the tax situation in our community. Unfortunately, we've already had to raise our tax by 0.25% to deal with the loss of hold harmless revenue. And in an economy of this type, where people are struggling to keep jobs and struggling to have enough money to pay for the basics in many cases, it's not a favorable topic to talk about increasing taxes once again. And it is my opinion that that is not something that we will be pursuing. I'm just one person out of 5 who have that ultimate authority to decide that. But in my opinion, the time is not right for that. I believe that we're going to have to tap into cash reserves, and as you say, that's not sustainable. It's a 1-year help. It's a 1-year assistance to dealing with the deficit that we may have. But I appreciate the attention to the issue that you provide and your staff provide, and I know we're getting great advice at the elected level from our staff. I'd love to have a one-year period of time where we just had a boom in our local economy. And it's not for lack of effort. We're certainly making the effort to do the right things with economic development, but it's a tough game to play as well.
Some serious headwinds that are thrown at us.
So Rob, I want to thank you again for being with us. It's a very important topic. I hope those of you who are viewing have learned something here this morning. And we appreciate you tuning in today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next Monday.